A young priest was so incredibly nervous during his very first Mass that he could barely get a word out. It was quite frankly a total disaster. Looking for help, he went to the Monsignor afterward and asked for some tips on how to stay calm. The older man smiled and said, "Look, whenever I get the jitters before a big sermon, I keep a glass of vodka on the pulpit instead of water. If I feel a stammer coming on, I just take a tiny sip." The following Sunday, the young priest decided to give it a shot. At first, his hand started to shake, so he took a sip, then another, then a few more. By the time he reached the midpoint of his sermon, he was on fire. He was shouting, gesturing wildly, and preaching with more energy than the congregation had seen in years. He felt like a superstar. When he got back to his office, he found a typed note from the Monsignor pinned to his door. It read, "Dear son, I have a few notes for your next performance. Next time, sip the vodka. Don't chug the whole glass. There are 10 commandments, not a dozen. There were 12 disciples, not a top 10 list. We say Jesus was consecrated, not constipated. Jacob wagered his donkey. He didn't bet his A. Please stop referring to Jesus Christ as the late JC. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are not Daddy, Junior, and the Spook. David slew Goliath. He didn't kick the holy CR*P out of him. When David was knocked off his donkey by a rock, you don't say he was stoned off his ass. We do not call the Holy Cross the Big T. The Virgin Mary is not Mary with the cherry. And finally, the proper grace before a meal is not rub-a-dub-dub. Thanks for the grub." Mr. Dixon, the science teacher, asked his fourth graders one day if anyone knew how to put 2 holes into 1 hole. Since no one was able to answer the question, he told the kids to go home and ask their fathers. They came back the next day, and still no one knew the answer. "Look," said Mr. Dixon while holding his index finger against his thumb, forming a little zero. "This is 1 hole. My nose has 2 holes, and I can put my hand over my nose and make my nose holes appear to this other hole." "Ah," said the children. The next day, little Johnny stood up and said, "Mr. Dixon, my daddy wants to know if you know how to put 7 holes in 1 hole." Me thought, how can you put 7 holes in one? Well, I'll be darned. I don't know how to do that. Did your father tell you how to? Yes, said little Johnny. You take a flute and shove it up your arse. 3 lively old ladies were sitting on a bench outside their retirement home, enjoying the sunshine, when an elderly gentleman walked by. One of them called out, "Hey you, we bet we can guess your exact age." The man chuckled and shook his head. "Not a chance. You've got no way of knowing that." Another lady grinned mischievously. "Oh, we have our methods. Just trust us." Curious and maybe a little too confident, the old man played along. After a bit of playful inspection and some exaggerated gestures, the ladies huddled together like detectives cracking a case. A moment later, they turned back to him and proudly announced, "You're 87 years old." The man's jaw dropped. "That's incredible. How did you figure that out?" The ladies burst into laughter and said, "Easy. We were at your birthday party yesterday." After decades of hard work, Grandma finally hung up her hat and retired. During her first checkup with a brand-new, young doctor, he asked her to bring in a full list of all the medications she was currently taking. As the doctor scanned the list, he stopped dead in his tracks. He looked over his glasses, completely baffled. "Mrs. Smith, I'm looking at your chart here, and did you realize you have a recurring prescription for birth control pills?" "Of course I do," she replied with a serene smile. "They're my secret to getting a great night's sleep." The doctor shook his head. "Ma'am, with all due respect, there is absolutely nothing in the chemistry of these pills that could possibly act as a sedative. They won't help you sleep." Grandma leaned in a little closer, patted the young doctor's knee, and whispered, "I know that, dear. But every single morning, I grind one of those little pills up and stir it into the orange juice my 16-year-old granddaughter drinks before she goes out. And believe me, I sleep like a baby." An elderly couple, who were both widowed, had been going out with each other for a long time. Urged on by their friends, they decided it was finally time to get married. Before the wedding, they went out to dinner and had a long conversation regarding how their marriage might work. They discussed finances, living arrangements, and so on. Finally, the old gentleman decided it was time to broach the subject of the physical side of their relationship. "How do you feel about sex?" he asked, rather tentatively. "I would like it infrequently," she replied. The old fellow sat quietly for a moment, leaned over towards her, and whispered, "Is that one word or two?" A world-renowned scientist looked up to the heavens one day and said, "Lord, we've reached a point where we don't really need you anymore. Science has finally mastered the secrets of existence. We can now create life from scratch, all on our own." God listened patiently and replied, "Is that really true? I'd love to see a demonstration." "You've got it," the scientist said confidently. He knelt down on the ground and started scooping up a handful of soil to begin his experiment. But before he could even start, God interrupted him. "Oh, hold on a second there. Get your own dirt." One afternoon, a teenager walked into the kitchen and saw his dad hunched over the morning newspaper. The kid rolled his eyes and let out a smirk. "Dad, honestly, you've got to get with the times," the boy said, shaking his head. "Why are you still buying those papers? Everything you could ever want to read is online now." His dad looked up, peering over his glasses. "Everything? Even the local sports scores?" "Absolutely," the boy replied confidently. "Every score, every play, updated in real time. Here, use my tablet. It's just like a newspaper, but 100 times better." The dad frowned, still looking skeptical. "And what about the business section? The stock market? Can I find all that on this glass thing too?" "Yes, Dad," the boy groaned. "I'm telling you, it has everything: sports, business, world news, entertainment. It literally replaces the need for a newspaper. You'll never have to buy one ever again." Feeling pretty proud of himself for dragging his dad into the 21st century, the boy went about his day. A few hours later, he spotted his dad outside in the yard. "Hey, Dad," he shouted. "I need my tablet back for a project." "Where did you leave it?" His dad stopped what he was doing, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and pointed toward the porch. "All right," he said calmly. "Go check the bottom of the birdcage." 3 bulls were standing in a dusty Texas pasture when they heard the rumor. The rancher was bringing in a brand new bull to join the herd. The first bull, a massive senior member of the group, snorted and said, "Look, I've been the king of this hill for 5 years. We all agreed that 100 of these cows belong to me. I don't care who this new guy is. He isn't touching a single one of mine." The second bull nodded in agreement. "I put in 3 years here and earned my 50 cows. I'll fight that newcomer until the bitter end before I give up my territory. I'm keeping every last one." The third bull, the youngest and smallest of the trio, piped up, "I've only been here a year, and you guys only let me have 10 cows. I might not be as big as you two yet, but I'm young and full of energy. I'm definitely not sharing." Just as they finished their tough talk, a massive 18-wheeler pulled into the pasture. The ramp dropped, and out stepped the biggest son of a bitch they had ever laid eyes on. He was a 4,700-pound mountain of muscle. Every time he took a step, the steel ramp groaned and threatened to snap. The first bull cleared his throat nervously. "You know, come to think of it, 100 cows is a lot of responsibility. I think it's only fair to offer our new friend a few dozen as a welcoming gift." The second bull started backing away. "Yeah, I've always wanted to explore the far north end of the pasture anyway. No sense in starting an argument over a few cows." They both looked over at the young third bull and were shocked to see him pawing the dirt, tossing his horns, and snorting like he was ready for war. "Kid, are you crazy?" the first bull whispered. "Just let him have your cows and stay alive." The young bull huffed and said, "He can have all my cows. I'm just making sure he knows I'm a bull too." 2 older gentlemen were navigating their carts through a crowded Walmart when they accidentally slammed into each other at the end of an aisle. "Oh, excuse me," the first guy said, looking a bit flustered. "I'm terribly sorry. I'm out here looking for my wife, and I guess I was so distracted I wasn't watching where I was going." The second guy sighed and nodded. "Don't worry about it. It's actually a funny coincidence. I'm looking for my wife, too. I've been circling these aisles for 20 minutes, and I'm starting to get a bit desperate." The first guy, trying to be helpful, said, "Well, maybe we can team up and spot them together. What does your wife look like?" The second guy didn't hesitate. Well, she's 27, tall, has striking red hair and blue eyes, incredibly long legs, a very curvy figure. And today she's wearing a pair of tiny short shorts. What about yours? The first guy looked at him for a split second and said, "Forget about mine. Let's go find yours." 3 engineers and 3 accountants were heading to the same big conference by train. While waiting at the station, the accountants noticed something strange. While they each bought their own individual tickets, the 3 engineers pooled their money and bought just one ticket for the whole group. "How are you 3 planning to travel on a single ticket?" one of the accountants asked, skeptical. "Just sit back and learn," one of the engineers replied with a grin. As soon as they boarded the train, the accountants took their seats, but the 3 engineers hurried to the back and squeezed into one of the small restrooms, locking the door. When the conductor came around and knocked, calling out, "Ticket, please," the door cracked open just an inch. A single arm reached out with the ticket. The conductor punched it and moved on. The accountants were blown away. They thought it was a genius move. A few days later, after the conference ended, the accountants decided to try the same trick to save some company cash. They went to the station and bought just one ticket for the 3 of them. To their total shock, they saw the engineers standing nearby. And this time, they didn't buy a ticket at all. "Wait a minute," an accountant whispered. "How are you going to get away with having no ticket?" "Watch and learn," the engineer said. Once on board, the 3 accountants scrambled into a restroom, and the 3 engineers piled into another one just across the hall. Shortly after the train started moving, one of the engineers stepped out of his stall, walked over to the accountant's door, gave it a firm knock, and said, "Ticket, please." The 10 ifs of employment. 1. If it rings, place it on hold. 2. If it malfunctions, notify the repair technician. 3. If it produces an unusual noise, disregard it. 4. If it is a colleague, pause work and engage in conversation. 5. If it is a supervisor, demonstrate productivity. 6. If it provides information, record the details. 7. If it is handwritten, transcribe it. 8. If it is typed, duplicate it. 9. If it is duplicated, organize it accordingly. 10. If it is Friday, consider it a low-priority task. A sharp-looking man in a tailored suit walked up to a woman at a high-end bar and offered to buy her a drink. She looked him up and down, impressed but skeptical. "Wait a second," she said with a smirk. "Don't you have a girlfriend? Guys who look like you are never actually single." He looked down at his glass, a sad expression crossing his face. "No. Unfortunately, we went our separate ways about a month ago." "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that," she replied, her guard dropping. "In that case, I'd love a glass of white wine." One glass turned into 2, and after a bit of flirting and some serious chemistry, they ended up heading back to her apartment. They spent the next few hours getting very well acquainted. Later, as he was buttoning up his shirt to leave, she watched him from the pillows. "You know," she said, "you're handsome, charming, and honestly, you're incredible in bed. I'm still struggling to figure out why on earth you and your girlfriend broke up." He paused, checked his watch, and said, "My wife found out." A local community club was organizing a baseball team. They could only muster 8 players and were hard put to find 9th. In desperation, they called on a new member, a very reserved Englishman who had just moved into the neighborhood, to join their team. During their first game, the Englishman came to bat. On the very first pitch, he knocked the ball out of the park. The team members stood there, dumbfounded. Unfortunately, so did the Englishman. "Run," his teammates cried. "For Pete's sake, run." The Brit turned and stared at them icily. "I jolly well shan't run," he replied. "I'm perfectly willing to buy you chaps another ball." My 8-year-old grandson was looking at me with a suspicious squint the other afternoon. "Grandma," he said, "I'm starting to think you just make stuff up to scare me." I acted surprised. "Like what, honey?" "Like when you told me that if we don't pick up our toys, a dark portal opens up in the corner of the room and sucks us into another dimension." I leaned in a little closer and whispered, "Well, that is exactly what happened to your older brother." He froze for a second, his eyes going wide. "Wait, what older brother?" I just smiled and said, exactly. A thriving baseball club is one of the features of a boys' organization connected with a prominent church. The team was recently challenged by a rival club. The pastor gave a special contribution of $5 to the captain, with the direction that the money should be used to buy bats, balls, gloves, or anything else that might help to win the game. On the day of the game, the pastor was somewhat surprised to observe nothing new in the club's paraphernalia. He called the captain to him. "I don't see any new bats or balls or gloves," he said. "We haven't anything like that," the captain admitted. "But I gave you $5 to buy them," the pastor exclaimed. "Well, you see," came the explanation, "you told us to spend it for bats or balls or gloves or anything that we thought might help to win the game, so we gave it to the umpire." A psychiatrist at a high-security mental institution decided to do something special for his patients and took them all out to a local baseball game. To make sure everything went smoothly, he spent weeks training them to respond to specific cues. By the time game day arrived, they were like a well-oiled machine. During the national anthem, the doctor shouted, "Up, nuts!" and the entire group stood up in perfect unison. After the final note, he called out, "Down, nuts!" and they all took their seats immediately. When a home team hit a massive home run, the doctor yelled, "Cheer, nuts!" and the section erupted in a wild applause. Later, when the umpire made a terrible call, the doctor hollered, "Boo, nuts!" and they all started jeering and catcalling the ref. The doctor was thrilled with how well it was going. Feeling confident, he headed to the concession stand for a hot dog, leaving his young assistant in charge for a few minutes. When he came back, the entire section was in a total riot. Popcorn was flying, people were tackling each other, and it was pure bedlam. He found his assistant hiding behind a seat and yelled, "What on earth happened?" The assistant, looking terrified, replied, "Everything was perfect, I swear." But then a vendor walked down the aisle and screamed, "Peanuts!" Two lifelong friends, Abe and Sol, were sitting on their usual park bench, tossing breadcrumbs to the pigeons and arguing about baseball statistics like they had for 50 years. Abe looked over at Sol and got a bit reflective. "Sol," he asked, "do you think they have baseball up in heaven?" Sol thought about it for a second and said, "I'm not sure, pal. But tell you what, let's make a pact. Whoever goes first has to find a way to come back and let the other one know the deal." They shook on it, and as fate would have it, Abe passed away just a few months later. One afternoon, Sol was sitting on that same bench alone, feeling a bit lonely, when he heard a faint, familiar whisper in the breeze. "Sol! Sol!" Sol jumped nearly out of his skin. "Abe, is that really you?" "It's me, Sol," the spirit whispered. Sol was breathless. "Tell me, is there baseball up there?" "Well," Abe's voice replied, "I've got some good news and some bad news." "Give me the good news first," Sol said, leaning in. "The good news," Abe said, "is that baseball in heaven is incredible. The fields are perfect, the weather is always 75 degrees, and every game is a sellout." Sol grinned. "That's amazing. So what could possibly be the bad news?" Abe sighed. "You're scheduled to pitch this Friday." A prison governor is appalled by the poor standard of English used by the inmates of his prison. To rectify this problem, he decides to employ a teacher from the local grammar school to set up remedial English classes. In the first lesson, the teacher explains that she is going to start with the basics. "Who knows what always comes after sentence?" she asks. All the prisoners answer together, "The appeal." A legendary English explorer was invited to a prestigious university to lecture on the customs of the remote tribes he had encountered during his years in the African jungle. The lecture hall was silent as he looked out at the students with a grave expression. "Can you imagine," he began, "a people so primitive that their morning ritual involves the consumption of the embryos of certain birds, accompanied by salted strips cut from the belly of swine?" A murmur of disgust rippled through the room. He continued, unfazed. "They take the seeds of wild grasses, grind them into a fine dust, mix that dust into a thick paste, and subject it to a scorching fire until it is blackened. Then, they take a greasy yellow secretion extracted from the mammary glands of a bovine and smear it over the top." The students looked at one another, visibly startled by such barbarism. The explorer paused, leaned over the lectern, and added softly, "What I have just described to you, of course, is a standard breakfast of bacon, eggs, and buttered toast." A classroom of 4-year-olds was struggling to adjust to the rules of preschool. Their teacher was especially strict about one thing: no baby talk. "You are big kids now," she told them firmly. "I expect you to use big people words at all times." During show and tell, she started calling on students to practice. "John," she asked, "tell the class what you did this past weekend. I want to see my Nana." John said with a grin. The teacher shook her head. "No, John. You want to visit your grandmother. Use your big people words." Next, she turned to Mitchell. "And what about you, Mitchell?" "I got a ride on a choo-choo," he chirped. "No, Mitchell," she corrected. "You took a trip on a train. Big people words, please." Finally, she looked at little Johnny, who was sitting very quietly. "Johnny, did you do anything special?" Johnny sat up straight, puffed out his chest, and said confidently, "I read a book." The teacher beamed. "That is absolutely wonderful, Johnny. And which book did you read?" Johnny took a deep breath, looked her right in the eye, and announced proudly, "Winnie the Crap." A young couple got married and left on their honeymoon. When they got back, the bride immediately called her mother. Her mother asked, "How was the honeymoon?" "Oh, Mom," she replied, "the honeymoon was wonderful. So romantic." Suddenly she burst out crying. "But, Mom," as soon as we returned, Sam started using the most horrible language, things I'd ever heard before. I mean, all these awful 4-letter words. "You got to come get me and take me home. Please, Mom." "Sarah," her mother said, "calm down. Tell me, what could be so awful? What 4-letter words?" "Please don't make me tell you, Mom," wept the daughter. "I'm so embarrassed. They're just too awful. Come get me, please." "Darling, you must tell me what has you so upset. Tell your mother these horrible 4-letter words." Still sobbing, the bride said, "Oh, Mom, there were words like dust, wash, iron, and cook.